Welcome, investors, analysts, and anyone who's ever looked at their 401k and thought, you know what this needs? More geopolitical anxiety. It's a pleasure to have you. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into a topic that's as cheerful as a tax audit during your own funeral, the simmering, now boiling conflict between Iran and Israel. And look, while the human cost is of course paramount, the financial fallout is something we simply cannot ignore. Because money, much like my hairline, has a tendency to recede dramatically under stress. Today, we break down how the Iran-Israel conflict could send shockwaves through global markets, from oil prices to inflation and beyond. We're not here to read tea leaves or consult a magic 8-ball that just keeps saying reply hazy, try again. No. We are going to rip this situation apart with the cold, hard precision of a surgeon who's had way too much coffee. We'll be leaning on data, charts, historical precedents, and expert analysis, because in a world of hot takes and panicked headlines, facts are the only life raft we have. So buckle up. We're about to connect the dots between a drone strike in Damascus and the price you pay for a gallon of milk. And trust me, the picture it paints is less Bob Ross and more Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Nightmares. Let's get into it. Right, let's start with the big one. Oil, the lifeblood of the global economy and the accelerant for nearly every major conflict. Iran is a major player in OPEC, churning out over 3 million barrels of crude oil per day. That's not just a drop in the bucket, it's a significant portion of the bucket itself. Now, even with existing sanctions, that oil finds its way to the market, mostly to China. But a direct conflict changes everything. Suddenly, you're not just talking about sanctions, you're talking about the potential for physical disruption. Imagine missile strikes on Iranian oil fields or processing facilities. That's not just turning off a tap, it's blowing up the tap, the pipe, and the entire plumbing system. And then there's the Strait of Hormuz, a tiny 21-mile wide choke point that feels like it was designed by a Bond villain to hold the world hostage. About a fifth of the entire world's daily oil consumption passes through this narrow waterway. If Iran decides to flex its muscles and disrupt, or even close the strait, the effect on oil prices wouldn't be a spike, it would be a geyser, a full-blown gusher of panicked buying. We've seen this movie before. Any hint of instability in the Middle East makes Brent crude jump like a cat on a hot tin roof. Traders don't wait for confirmation, they price in the risk immediately, which means your gas prices go up before the first tanker is even delayed. This isn't theoretical. Look at the data. After Iran's drone attack on Israel, Brent crude futures immediately ticked upwards. It's a Pavlovian response. Bell rings, dog salivates. Middle East conflict escalates. Oil traders start sweating and hitting the buy button. The fear isn't just about Iran's direct supply. It's about the contagion of chaos. The risk that the conflict spills over into neighboring producers like Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Suddenly, the entire region, which controls a frankly terrifying amount of the world's energy, looks like a house of cards in a hurricane. And we're all standing downwind, holding our wallets. So, oil prices are going to the moon. Fantastic. What happens next? Well, that expensive oil seeps into every corner of the economy like a relentless, greasy stain. It's not just the price at the pump. It's the cost of transporting goods, from bananas to Amazon packages. It's the cost of manufacturing plastics, fertilizers, and basically anything that isn't carved from wood by a hermit. This surge in energy and transport costs gets passed down the line, from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the retailer, until it lands squarely in your lap in the form of higher prices for everything. This is inflation, and it's a multi-headed hydra. And who is tasked with slaying this beast? Our brave central bankers, led by Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve, who for the past year have been telling us, we're getting it under control, rate cuts are just around the corner. An oil shock from this conflict is the equivalent of kicking Powell's ladder out from under him while he's trying to get a cat out of a tree. Just as they were contemplating easing up and cutting interest rates to give the economy some breathing room, a surge in oil prices would force them to do the exact opposite. They might have to hold rates higher for longer, or God forbid, even hike them again to stamp out this new wave of inflation. The market, of course, hates this, absolutely despises it. Stock markets thrive on the promise of cheap money and predictable growth. The prospect of delayed rate cuts and stubborn inflation is like poison ivy to investors. You'd see immediate volatility, Growth stocks, which are particularly sensitive to interest rates, would get hammered. Bonds would become a mess. The beautiful Goldilocks soft landing scenario that economists have been dreaming of would evaporate, replaced by the grim specter of stagflation. That's high inflation and stagnant economic growth, the economic equivalent of being both on fire and drowning at the same time. It's the worst of all worlds. While we're worrying about our stock portfolios, let's not forget the economies at the epicenter of this mess. For Israel, a prolonged conflict is an economic nightmare. Its high-tech Silicon Wadi is powered by people, many of whom are now reservists, called up for military duty. That's a direct brain drain from one of its most vital economic engines. Foreign direct investment, which loves stability, would dry up faster than a puddle in the Negev desert. And tourism, a significant source of revenue, would simply cease to exist. Who's booking a holiday to a country with active air raid sirens? Their currency, the shekel, would likely plummet, and the government would be spending billions not on infrastructure or education but on defense. And what about Iran? Its economy is already on its knees, crippled by decades of sanctions, mismanagement, and corruption. A full-scale war would be the final crushing blow. The Iranian rial is already in a state of near-perpetual freefall, and this would only accelerate its demise, triggering hyperinflation that would make life unbearable for ordinary citizens. The regime would divert whatever resources it has left toward the war effort, leading to even greater shortages of food, medicine, and other basic necessities. This internal pressure could, ironically, either solidify the regime's iron grip through nationalist fervor, or become the catalyst for its complete implosion. It's a horribly unstable situation, but the damage doesn't stop at their borders. Neighboring countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt would be caught in the crossfire, both literally and economically. Jordan and Egypt, heavily reliant on tourism and international aid, would see those income streams evaporate. They could face a massive influx of refugees, placing an unbearable strain on already stretched public services and social fabric. Lebanon, already a failed state by many metrics, could be dragged directly into the conflict via Hezbollah, leading to its total destruction. The entire region, a place of immense economic potential, would be set back decades by a conflict that poisons the well for everyone. Let's talk about how everything you own gets to you. For the most part, it's on a very, very large boat. A huge portion of the trade between Asia and Europe sails through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. It's the superhighway of global shipping. But thanks to attacks on commercial vessels by Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, that superhighway now has a massive flaming roadblock on it. The alternative route, going all the way around the southern tip of Africa, is like taking the scenic route through Siberia to get from New York to New Jersey. It adds up to 2 weeks to the journey. This rerouting isn't just an inconvenience, it's a massive cascading cost. First, there's the fuel. 2 extra weeks at sea for a giant container ship costs a fortune in bunker fuel, a cost that is immediately passed on. Then there's the time. A 2-week delay means your shipment of car parts, iPhones, or cheap t-shirts is 2 weeks late. This creates supply chain chaos. Factories might have to pause production lines waiting for components. Retailers could face stock shortages. It's the 2021 supply chain crisis all over again, but this time with the added thrill of active missiles. And for the brave, or maybe foolish companies that still decide to risk the Red Sea, the costs are astronomical in a different way. Insurance premiums for war risk have skyrocketed, in some cases by over 5,000%. Yes, 5,000%. That's not a typo. It's the price of entry to a war zone. So you either pay a fortune in time and fuel to go the long way, or you pay a fortune in insurance to take the shortcut through Missile Alley. Either way, the cost of moving a single container from Shanghai to Rotterdam has more than doubled. And guess who ultimately pays for that? Yes, you at the checkout counter. Every single product becomes that little bit more expensive. A major conflict in the Middle East doesn't just scramble economies, it redraws the geopolitical map. For years, Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been on an ambitious diversification spree, pouring their oil wealth into futuristic cities, tech hubs, and tourism under grand plans like Vision 2030. They are desperately trying to build a post-oil future. A regional war puts a giant smoking crater right in the middle of those plans. International investors and talent, the very people they need to attract, will flee instability. The dream of becoming the next Singapore gets deferred for the reality of being next door to a war zone. Meanwhile, this chaos creates openings for other global players. China, which has been trying to position itself as a peacemaker and has a vested interest in the region's oil, suddenly finds its balancing act incredibly difficult. It's Iran's biggest economic lifeline, but it also has deep ties with Saudi Arabia and Israel. A full-blown war forces it to pick sides, or risk its influence evaporating. And then there's Russia, bogged down in Ukraine, but always happy to stir the pot elsewhere to distract the West and drive up oil prices, which helps fund its own war machine. It sees regional instability not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. For global investors, this creates a minefield of risk. It's not just about avoiding direct exposure to Israel or Iran, it's about understanding the second and third order effects. Will sanctions be tightened on anyone doing business with Iran, creating compliance nightmares for multinational corporations? Will defense stocks soar while airline and travel stocks plummet? The risk premium on assets across the emerging world would likely increase, as investors pull back into safe haven assets like US dollars and gold. The entire global investment landscape becomes more fragmented, more volatile, and frankly, much more dangerous. So, what does the future hold? Let's paint two scenarios. The first is the contained conflict scenario. This is the best case, if you can call it that. In this version, the conflict remains a series of tit-for-tat strikes, proxy skirmishes, and harsh rhetoric. It's tense, it's ugly, and it keeps markets on edge. But it doesn't escalate into a full-scale direct war between Iran and Israel. Oil prices would remain elevated due to the risk premium, maybe hovering around $100 a barrel. Inflation would be stickier than we'd like, and central banks would be cautious, but the global economy would likely avoid a full-blown recession. It's a low-grade fever, not a catastrophic illness. But then there's the second scenario, all-out war. This is the nightmare. This involves direct, sustained military campaigns, Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and oil infrastructure, and Iranian retaliation targeting Israeli cities and strategic assets, possibly closing the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a scenario the global economy is prepared for. Oil prices wouldn't just spike, they would launch into orbit, potentially hitting $150 a barrel or higher. This would trigger a massive energy shock on a scale not seen since the 1970s. The result would almost certainly be a deep, painful global recession. In this dark future, we would face the full force of stagflation. Economic growth would grind to a halt or even reverse, while inflation would soar into the double digits in many countries. Global supply chains would shatter. Political instability would spread like a virus across the Middle East and beyond. Financial markets would crash. This is the doomsday scenario that keeps strategists and economists up at night. The line between the bad scenario and the apocalyptic one is terrifyingly thin, and it depends entirely on decisions made by a handful of people in Tehran and Jerusalem. It's a global economic game of chicken, and we're all tied to the bumper. So, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the economic minefield that is the Iran-Israel conflict. As we've seen, this is far more than a distant regional dispute. The Iran-Israel conflict poses major risks to energy markets, inflation, and regional stability, with global spillover effects. From the price of a barrel of Brent crude to the interest rate on your mortgage, the shockwaves have the potential to reach every single one of us. The interconnectedness of our global system means that a fire in one corner of the house threatens to burn the whole thing down. The stakes, both human and financial, could not be higher. We've laid out the macro risk tonight: the soaring oil prices, the inflation monster, the shipping chaos, and the grim possibility of a global recession. But each of these pressures affects different sectors in unique ways. The impact on a defense contractor is wildly different from the impact on a semiconductor firm or a luxury goods brand. There are layers upon layers to this crisis, and we've only just scratched the surface. We can go deeper, and we will, if that's what you want to see. This is an evolving story, and our analysis has to evolve with it. Which brings us to you. We've covered the big picture, but what parts of this puzzle are you most concerned about? Would you like a deeper analysis on how specific industries like tech, defense, or shipping are affected? Are you more interested in the currency markets or the long-term geopolitical shifts? Let us know in the comments. Your feedback drives our content, And in a situation, this complex collective intelligence is our best asset. Thank you for watching. Stay informed and stay safe.